Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Lifestyle Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Stephanie Demetriou, who's the founder of Maker Suite, which is a SaaS solution that enables professionals to create talking head videos in minutes, which is like a YouTube explainer videos for sales. And Maker Suite is helping people become more effective communicators and storytellers. A big thanks to Joy Abisab for the introduction. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for having me.
Awesome. You have an interesting journey. How did you get your start in startups, and what made you start Maker Suite?
So, I always wanted to start my own company from a very young age, but I think a lot of the times we lack the confidence to just go and do it. So I went, I would say, the more conventional route and started at Bain & Company, where I spent about 4 years, which was great because it gave me the hard skills, but then I had a very strong itch to create and get much more operational. And so I joined, I was introduced by a friend to a founder that had exited a business quite successfully and was starting a new venture. And I thought that was a great way to learn. And so I did that for about 2 years before starting Maker Suite, which I think you just asked what made us build Maker Suite. We wanted to, obviously video is one of the most prominent mediums to communicate with your audience. And we really wanted to build a platform that supported self-employed professionals in actually creating their own videos so that they could market themselves. Because especially personality-driven companies, their sales and their customers is very much driven by who they are as individuals. But the more we spoke to these types of people, the more we realized they had no idea how to create video content, didn't know what their lighting should be like, how to write a script, how to even publish their videos. And so that's where the idea behind Maker Suite was, and essentially creating a platform very similar to Wix or Squarespace that enables anyone to become a creator.
Oh, interesting. Got it. And you talked about working as a management consultant. What was your experience as a management consultant when you were there in South Africa? And how did you, was it a conscious move to London?
So it was definitely a conscious move to move to London. So at Bain, I left university and went straight into consulting and was very sort of used to being a high achiever, and then went stuck into the Bain world where you sort of become more of an average achiever compared to the rest of your peers. Great training ground, did a lot of strategy, big data projects, which set me up for success, I would say, as a founder. But I still had this very strong drive to do something operational. And so 2 years in, I did an exchange or a transfer to the London office. And after that, I felt like there was more opportunity for me here to build a startup. Obviously, there's lots of white space in South Africa and Africa in general. But it was an operating environment that I was more comfortable with in the UK. And so got a permanent transfer. And then after that, joined that medtech startup I mentioned earlier.
Kind of interesting. And I've worked in tech startups where you have management consultants, and then they, either they work in an operational role or they start up. But if you could go back in time, would you get straight into startups or start building your own thing, or would you still give an advice to founders that it's good to work as a management consultant for a few years before you branch out on your own?
That's a very hard one, and I think it's very dependent on the individual. So for myself personally, I felt like I needed something to give me the confidence and also something to fall back on. So startups, as you know, are very risky, and you constantly wonder, am I going to have a job in a couple of months? And so having that credible Bain background is something nice to fall back on, I would say, or de-risks it to some degree. I think it does give you sort of foundational skill sets. There are things that I personally feel like I learned a lot more in startups, which you don't necessarily experience as a more junior consultant. So for example, learning how to sell when you don't have much to sell, to potential employees, potential customers, even the suppliers you work for. So I never sort of dealt with, I think selling is one of the most important skills in a startup.
Yeah.
And something you only learn, I think, later as a consultant when you reach more principal partner level. So there are definitely certain skills that I had to learn on my own being in a startup. It's very hard for me to know where would I have gotten to at this point if I didn't have, for example, analytical skills or being able to structure my thoughts, being able to upward manage, understanding people, because obviously at a big consulting company, you work with lots of often difficult clients potentially. You're dealing with managers with different styles, etc.
Got it. Interesting. And you build a SaaS product. Maker Suite helps people tell their stories through the power of video. But I want to understand what is the revenue model? Who's your ICP, and how did you get your first 10 customers?
Yeah. So at the moment, our revenue model is typical SaaS pricing. So you pay per month,
Okay.
and you get a set amount of video projects that you can create.
Okay.
Our ICP is marketing leads or heads of communication at businesses that typically need to create quite a high volume of video. So there's this need to keep creating, and they want to improve the quality of video. So a lot of people often have friction with video. So if you've never created video before, the barrier to start creating is a lot higher than people already creating. Obviously, the goal is to go and serve those that have a bit more tension or friction when creating it. And then in terms of how we got our first 10 clients, I think this is quite typical for most startups. They typically, and it depends on the model you're doing, so mass scale or more B2B, is definitely through network. Doesn't mean I knew them personally, but they came through via. So I think the power of your network is very important, and nurturing those relationships. So typically I would find like an ideal customer profile, see if there was someone in my network who knew me, who knew them and me, and could facilitate an introduction, because obviously friendly introductions are a lot more powerful than, reaching out cold. Even saying things like to a potential prospect, Ted told me to reach out to you, feels a lot warmer and open. And as soon as the conversation's open and you can sell directly to them, it becomes a lot easier. So I would say that's mainly how we got our first 10 clients.
Okay, got it. And you mentioned about head of communication. So is it about companies who churning a lot of video content, and any tips on what advice would you give to people who would want to improve the content, especially the video content?
So the first tip, okay, you get, like I said, there's two audiences. The first is those that want to create content. The advice is you just got to start. I think, we're at the point in time where the quality of your video doesn't need to be perfect. What matters more is the messaging you give. And are you providing your users what they actually want to listen to? And can you do that in a clear, concise way? And as long as you nail that and have a very specific ICP that you're speaking to, and you have a very clear message that they resonate or will be interested in, that becomes more important than having an HD video you've recorded on a 4K camera. So I think just getting in front of your audience and starting. I think with content, there's about a period of a couple of months. It's very similar to SEO, where if you're not, you need to be creating consistently. And then there's like this hockey stick effect, which a lot of people just give up too early. So that's one tip. The second is in terms of helping people improve the kind of content they're creating. I think this varies a lot. So depending on your channel. So YouTube, for example, making sure that, again, your small things like thumbnails, I think it's tweaking a lot of the pieces of your video. So your thumbnail, the description, the types of video you're creating. and seeing what resonates most with your audience. And then based on that, creating more of that type of content and really niching down on your audience and what you're talking about.
Got interesting. I think I listened to one of the videos from Mr. Beast, who said that he spends, I don't know, thousands of dollars on thumbnails. I've been experimenting a bit, so I'll take that feedback and try to improve my thumbnails more.
Yeah, we can help you with that.
Yeah, awesome. And especially when you building a company, how do you define a high performance in your team? What does high performance mean for you?
I think this depends, and sorry, I have a lot of caveats every time I answer a question. I think it depends on the stage of your company. So for me right now, I love team performance. I love team members that can take full ownership of what they're doing, because for me, that's leverage. So as much of the tasks I have that I can hand off to someone else, so I can focus on what I'm good at, is very important. So I would prefer to hire more experienced people.
Yeah.
Not those that are so far away from actually doing the day-to-day job. So they're willing to do that, but they also experienced enough to know what to expect and know how to manage various stakeholders. That's what I would say. And then, people that I think when you start to trust someone that they can do their job better than you would ever do it, I think that's a very important indicator. And then obviously underneath that is a lot of smaller things that enable you to trust them. So good communication, they're obviously effective in what they do, are good at what they do, make decisions quickly, but also with thought when they need to.
Got it. Interesting. And you mentioned that you would prefer to hire somebody who's more experienced, but I was just wondering, when it comes to pre-seed and seed startups, when you are looking at speed is so important, so is execution. But would you hire somebody with an expertise in the domain you're in, like somebody in the B2B SaaS, or would you still take a bet on somebody who's just a fresher but is quite hungry?
I think it depends on the region they're operating in. So for example, and we've had experience with many different developers. So technology as an example, when you want to move with speed and your tech stack is maybe, let's say you have JavaScript, okay?
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily take a bet on someone hungry that has a different coding language.
Right.
Versus sales, which you could argue is a lot more, relies a lot on your creativity. So obviously there's experience involved, but your hunger can force you to go the extra mile. And it's a type of where persistence and not caring what people think necessarily, or not getting upset by people turning you down is more important. So it very much depends on the role. Yeah.
Got it. And how do you structure your decision making throughout the day? You're always looking to hire people and do a lot of strategic meetings, but how do you structure your day so that you have the energy to keep building up?
This is a very good question, because I think it's something I constantly am thinking about. Like, how much time do I spend doing value activities versus admin, which could be outsourced to someone else?
Okay.
So part of my thinking actually goes to thinking about that, because I think everyone should really, to perform well, you should be focusing on the things that matter and things that you're good at. So I try to structure my day so that in the mornings, or I block time to actually do the value driving activities. I also like to plan in advance. So if I know that there's going to be something that will block my team, I try to plan ahead so that they never are blocked by me, especially if it's something important. Obviously, if it's something minor, then it doesn't matter so much. The second dimension to decision making is I think a lot in terms of a 2x2. So normally if you had, a typical consultant 2x2, you had impact versus reversibility. So if something's very high impact and very irreversible, you typically want to focus more time on it. That's something that's very low impact and very easily reversible. So for example, I don't know, I'll probably give a bad example. So like what tools you use to create your thumbnails as an example. So versus things that are irreversible. So anything, if you're a UK company that goes onto Companies House, for example, you can never erase that. It sits there forever.
Okay, got it. And I want to understand, especially when it comes to high-level decisions, which C-level executives make. How do you differentiate from tactic versus strategy, and when is the right time to change your tactics and strategy? In different stages of the company.
Yeah. So for me, the strategy is very much like, where are you going? Like in the next, whatever your time horizon is, where are you going? And tactics are, how do you, in every 3-month increment, what are the things you're going to do that help you reach that strategy? And with tactics, I think you need to, they can be small things that you change to try get different results. And eventually you're going to say to yourself, okay, I've exhausted these options. It's time to move on to another tactic. With strategy specifically, I think it's important to have a very clear set of hypotheses that you're testing, and you test that using certain tactics and with that, if your hypotheses remain unproven for a set amount of time and you feel you've done everything you can to try and prove that hypothesis, then I think it's probably time to switch. But I think this is a very hard question, because I often challenge myself. Have you given enough? It's a very fine line between knowing when to cut ties and pivot or change and when to keep going, it's a very hard skill. And I think maybe second-time founders or founders that have exited will notice that a lot quicker than first-time founders.
Okay, interesting. And do you like set a timeline? Like I'm going to give 3 months to decide, if this channel, the sales channel or the marketing channel is going to work, or this tactic is going to work. Do you think setting those timelines makes sense?
Yes, totally. And it depends on the channel you're doing. So if you're doing a longer term channel, you may want to give it a bit more time to start to see data. Something like performance ads, again, you can only really measure if you've put enough resource into it. So if you put £100, you're probably not going to be able to prove or disprove your hypothesis. So I think you need to also be realistic with the time and the resource you put in, and if that's doable to test that certain hypothesis. And you know what? You don't necessarily prove it entirely in 3 months.
Yeah.
Again, that's a hard one, but you need to get closer to, in the beginning phase, you're chipping away to find that product market fit.
Yeah. Got it. And I've been into business development, partnerships, and sales, and especially when it comes to pre-seed and seed startups. When do you think a founder should hire a head of sales? Do you think should you hire somebody who's junior and who can just get a bit of attraction, and then should hire a head of sales, or do you think the first sales hire should be the head of sales?
From my experience, I think when the founder can do it themselves very well and they've nailed the process. I don't think, first of all, unless the senior salesperson feels like they're a founder, they need direction, and they're likely to get bored with founders that are, because you're in this phase where you're constantly changing and iterating. So I don't think I would hire a head of sales too early. Obviously depends on their profile. And I think junior people will really struggle without direction. In the beginning, you don't really have much. You're sort of, taking a paint gun and trying to hit around and see what hits and what sticks. And that's at the point when you figure out, okay, this target audience, this kind of messaging, this is what we're offering. At that point, I think, can you consider, hiring maybe one person and then scaling. Also bear in mind, a head of sales is likely used to working in teams.
Yeah.
And so if they're operating on their own, doing the job of a junior salesperson, often they'll get very demotivated. So it's a very hard role. I mean, and in the later stages, I think it can be an enormous value add to your business. But I think in the early stages, you need to be very mindful of like the key people you want to hire. This is very similar for marketing too. So for marketing, a lot of people prefer to hire very generalists.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I prefer to take a hypothesis on channels and then find experts in those channels and run experiments with them, because I find that's much quicker to get the result than working with a generalist that's maybe pretty average at all the channels you're trying to tackle. Because then it's also very hard to understand, is it the way they executed, or was it actually the channel?
Okay, interesting. And especially about the marketing hire, do you hire a lot of freelancers or experts, and or is it going to be a generalist who hires all these freelancers and they report to them? What would be
I don't do the second way. Again, I don't think a generalist would be able to handle, like, they may be able to if they're senior enough, but I don't think it's necessary in the early days. And again, I'm like a pre-seed seed stage startup, so to maybe later stage. And I typically find those experts through network, and I normally do a couple of references and compare to about 2 to 3 people. So I have a decent number. So I know, okay, they're the right ones. I'm going to go with them. And then you see how it goes. And once you work with enough, you start to get a sense of what good looks like. And so every time you find, someone new to work with, and your network just keeps growing.
Yeah. Interesting. And, especially in a SaaS company, the two important roles are the sales as well as product. And I was just wondering, what characteristics should a founder look for somebody who's a high performing sales hire?
So I think persistence. I think one of the most important things is actually creativity. Yeah. Because when you're this early, you have to be like a bit creative to get like the results you want. So definitely creativity, thick skin, very persistence is one of the most important things. Like, are they willing to, there's almost like, there's a bit of a level of shame when you're like trying to sell so much and so hard to people. Are they willing to get through that feeling? Yeah. And then EQ is a very big one. So as soon as someone answers the phone, can you tell by their mood if they want a quick, snappy 30-second sales call, or if you need to ask them how they are, etc.
Got it. Super interesting. And especially, in a seed startup, would you hire a B player first and then keep, raising the bar, or would you wait for a longer time to hire a player, in a like permanent role?
I think the first 10 people that you hire that are, let's say, in the tech team, let's say 5 to 10. I can't say beyond that, but I would say A. I would not go for B first, unless the role is something a bit more like repetitive or something. But for any like strategic kind of role, product, technology, sales, marketing, my preference, and this is why sometimes I prefer to outsource marketing to experts, and then you don't carry the weight of having a full-time employee, and you can also, if it doesn't work, stop that kind of activity. But definitely A for the first initial hires. I think after that you can scale to B, that the A's can manage or train, But personally, I'd start with A.
Okay, got it. And coming onto the product hires, when do you think is the right time to hire a product hire in a startup, especially since founders so attached to the product? But can you, especially in a seed startup or pre-seed startup, can you give away the responsibility to a new person who could be handling the product?
So this depends on the founding team structure. So typically, if you start very early and you have like a CTO, they may take on all that, depending on how technical they are versus the other founder. One of the two will sort of naturally take a lead on product.
Okay.
If you don't have that experience at all in your team, then I think as soon as you have either a big enough tech team or a very deep understanding of what you need to build. I'm going to caveat this because I haven't thought of all scenarios, but I think having a product person when you don't have tech people to build doesn't really make sense unless they're a front-end developer and they can do support you even on, testing landing pages, etc. So I would probably, this is for pure tech products, obviously.
Yeah.
I'd probably wait a bit for a tech team.
Okay. And is there any optimal onboarding process for tech and product hires?
I think the roles are quite different. For tech hires, I think getting them familiar with, tech hires, they obviously need to be very familiar with your product. So typically like an audit of your current tech stack, let them review other people's code, say what they would have changed, for example. But I think the best way is to dive right in, give them a few tasks, get going, and you learn as you go. Product, I would say the first thing I would do is it depends if they're very familiar with your domain or not, but testing your product, providing feedback on your product, potentially starting to do QA with the tech team so they understand what kind of issues the app currently has, doing lots of research on existing tools, and working with the tech team. But again, this depends on, is the product also, that role can involve so many details. Are they a product manager, in which case they're just managing the tech team, or are they also involved in product design, product iteration, product strategy? It's quite a broad term, I would say. So it depends on what areas the expertise lies. So what I just said about testing other apps, testing the existing app, testing other apps would be very applicable for someone doing design or product strategy.
Got it. And I quickly want to the top three. What's your favorite business book?
I would say, there's one that's slipped my mind actually. Well, one of them's Crossing the Chasm. I think it's very important, especially for early stage startups and especially in the sales process. You constantly have to remind yourself, who is that initial audience that I can get traction with, and what do they look like, and what do they care about? That's probably one of my favorites books. And then another one which I found really interesting is Predictably Irrational, which is a lot about behavior. So he speaks a bit about pricing behavior and people's perception of money. And I think that's also a great book.
Got it. We'll put that in show notes. And if you could go back in time when you started building Makersuite, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
I think I probably would have started, you're also constantly thinking, what's the big vision? Because that's what you sell to investors, employees, etc. But then you need to take a step back and be like, what's the one thing I'm going to do well? And I think that laser focus is something if I could go back on, and I continuously even do it now, what's the one thing I'm being laser focused on and my whole team is being focused on?
Okay, got it. And what's your favorite online tool? For example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom, anything other than Makersuite?
I love Canva. Canva's a great one. I love it for design and versatility. I'm also quite a fan of Pipedrive, which we use for sales. I'm a big user of many online tools, our SaaS expenses. Yeah, I would say those are the two top ones I can think of.
Okay, got it. We'll put that in the show notes. And Stephanie, what is the best way people can know about you and about Makersuite?
So you can either go to our website and contact us, or email me. Maybe I'll give you my email to put in the link of this podcast. And yeah, always open to feedback, suggestions, the chat.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Thank you, and have a great day.